Look at what is sitting in your kitchen right now. A jar of honey, a bottle of olive oil, a bulb of garlic on the counter, maybe a bowl of figs, or a handful of almonds. These are not wellness trends. They are not expensive supplements someone invented last year. They were written down thousands of years ago in one of the most read books in human history. And most people who have held that book in their hands never once connected those pages to their pantry shelf. 20 foods, all of them there, most of them ordinary, and almost all of them prepared the wrong way. Wait until you hear what people get wrong about the simplest one on this list, because it is not the ingredient that changed. It is what we stopped doing with it. We spend so much time looking for the next thing, the newest extract, the latest capsule with an ingredient list that takes 30 seconds just to read out loud. I have done it myself, standing in a health food shop, holding a bottle, squinting at the back label, wondering if it would actually be the thing that made a difference. And then I came home, set it next to a bottle of olive oil I had barely touched, and something struck me. That oil, that one ordinary bottle sitting on my kitchen shelf, it was there in the text too, mentioned more times than almost anything else. Not as a curiosity, not as an ancient remedy that needed to be rediscovered. As a daily food, a staple, something so ordinary that people built their lamps around it, their cooking around it, their household routines around it. That is the real story of these 20 foods. They were not special. They were not reserved for the wealthy or the powerful. They were what ordinary people ate, grew, stored, and used every single day. And somewhere between then and now, we forgot how to do that. Let us start where this list begins for most people, with olive oil. It appears throughout Scripture in a way that tells you exactly how central it was, not just as food, but as light, as preparation, as something handed over in offering. The ancient world pressed it from green-gray olives, unrefined, cloudy, carrying the full character of the fruit. When I switched from the pale, odorless, refined version I had been using to a proper cold-pressed extra virgin oil, I understood the difference immediately. The color alone is striking, deep gold with a green tint. You hold it up to the light and it looks almost alive. The smell is grassy and slightly peppery. That is what it is supposed to be. The mistake most people make with olive oil is buying the refined version and thinking it is the same thing. It is not. The refining process uses heat and often removes much of what made the oil valuable in traditional kitchens. The version that has been used in Mediterranean households for generations, the version that appears in ancient texts, was pressed and used without that process. Cold-pressed, unfiltered, used generously over food that was already cooked rather than blasted with high heat. That is the method. That is the version worth seeking. Honey is where it gets genuinely surprising, and the difference is visible the moment you open the jar. Proverbs mentions honey as something pleasant, something sustaining. Psalms draws on its sweetness as an image of something deeply good. What those writers were describing was not the pale, liquid, ultra-processed honey in a plastic bear that most of us have poured onto toast for years. Raw honey looks completely different. It is thicker, often crystallized at the edges, cloudy rather than clear. It pours slowly, reluctantly almost, from the spoon. The texture is dense and almost waxy in the mouth. That is not a flaw. That is what honey actually is before it gets heated and filtered into uniformity. Heating honey beyond a certain temperature changes its character entirely. The traditional version was stored as it came, used at room temperature or dissolved into warm water that was not boiling. That was the household method. Simple, careful, unrushed. If your honey pours like water and tastes mostly like sugar, it has probably been processed far beyond what older traditions would have recognized. Now, garlic has a preparation secret that almost nobody uses, and it takes less than 10 minutes. In the book of Numbers, the Israelites wandering in the desert remember what they left behind. They list it. Specifically, fish, cucumbers, melons, leeks, onions, and garlic. That is not a random list. That is a homesick person remembering their kitchen. Those were not luxury foods. They were daily staples. And the fact that garlic appears in that memory tells you something important about how central it was to ordinary life. The mistake people make with garlic is simple. They crush it or mince it and immediately put it over high heat. What they may not know is that when you crush garlic and leave it to rest for several minutes before cooking, something different happens in the process. A reaction occurs between the moment of crushing and the moment of heat. Traditional Mediterranean preparation accounts for this. You crush, you wait, then you cook. The garlic that is rested smells different, tastes different, carries a more complex warmth in the finished dish. I started doing this after reading about the old method, and I have not gone back. It is one of those things that sounds almost too small to matter. It is not. Onions and leeks appear in the same passage as garlic, and they deserve a moment here too. We treat them as background flavor, as things that go in the pot first and disappear into whatever is being made. But in that desert memory, they are called out by name, missed, longed for. They were not the supporting cast, they were the meal. Now we move into the fruits of the land, and this is where the preparation mistakes are biggest. Starting with figs. Figs appear throughout Scripture more than most people realize. Isaiah describes using a fig poultice in a way that suggests figs were not just eaten, but used in household practice. They were dried and stored, pressed into cakes, carried as sustaining food on long journeys. The whole fruit, dried slowly, was something completely different from what gets sold as fig jam or fig spread today. When a fig is dried whole, the natural sugars concentrate slowly. The texture becomes dense and almost chewy. The flavor is deep and dark. A supermarket fig spread has been cooked, sweetened further, and processed into something that bears almost no resemblance to that. If you want to connect to the traditional use of figs, buy the whole dried fruit. Look for ones that have been dried simply, without sugar added. You will immediately taste the difference. Save this one, because we have 15 more to go, and you will want to come back to the preparation details. Pomegranate appears in Song of Solomon and in Deuteronomy as one of the 7 species of Israel, the foods that define the land. Whole, heavy seeds packed tight inside white pith. When you split one open on a cutting board, the juice runs immediately. Bright red, slightly tart, with a sweetness underneath. That is the real thing. The concentrated pomegranate juice from a carton is not that. It has usually been processed, often from concentrate and frequently sweetened. The experience of eating the actual seeds, the crunch and burst of each one, is completely different from drinking juice from a bottle. Older traditions use pomegranates whole, in season, as a fruit to be worked for and savored, not as a convenience drink. We are not even halfway through, and the most unexpected entry has not arrived yet. Grapes and raisins appear throughout the text in ways that make clear they were preserved food. Raisin cakes are mentioned in several books. Raisins were portable, dense with sweetness, practical for travel and for leaner seasons. The raisin on a modern supermarket shelf is often treated with preservatives to keep it soft and pale. A proper dried grape, dried slowly without treatment, is darker, chewier, more intensely flavored. If you can find unsulfured raisins, the difference is worth noticing. Dates, whether named explicitly or implied through the palm trees that appear repeatedly in Scripture, are still a daily food across the Middle East. A medjool date held between your fingers feels almost heavy for its size. The skin has a slight give, and the flesh inside is dense, sticky, with a flavor that sits somewhere between caramel and brown sugar. These are not like the hard, pale, processed date pieces sold for baking. When people choose date sugar or date syrup over the whole fruit, they lose the texture, the slowness, the quiet satisfaction of the real thing. The whole date, eaten slowly, is what the tradition was built around. Barley is one I want to spend a moment on because most people walk past it entirely. When Elijah is exhausted under the juniper tree, an angel comes to him and there is bread baked on coals. Simple bread. Barley was the grain of the ordinary person in the ancient world. Wheat was valued, but barley fed the people who were not wealthy. It is humble in the best possible way. Simmering barley slowly in a pot fills the kitchen with a smell that is nutty and mild and deeply warm. Not the instant kind, which is often pearled and stripped of much of its outer layer. The traditional version takes longer, sits heavier in the pot, and rewards the weight. I didn't grow up eating barley. The first time I made it properly, very slowly, I finally understood why it shows up on every ancient grain list. Lentils are perhaps the most famous legume in Scripture. Esau trades his birthright for a bowl of them. You can imagine a pot of red lentils, deep orange before they soften into something closer to gold, with garlic and cumin, the smell filling the room. Red lentils dissolve into a thick, silky soup when cooked slowly. Green lentils hold their shape better and take longer. Both were staples. The mistake people make is rushing them, cooking at too high a heat, leaving them grainy and flat. Low and slow is the method. The flavor deepens when they are not hurried. Flaxseed is referenced in Proverbs and appears as one of the oldest cultivated plants in the ancient world. The preparation mistake here is consistent and common. Whole flax seeds pass through the body largely unchanged. They look like seeds, feel like seeds, and largely behave like seeds at the other end too. When you grind flaxseed, the character changes entirely. A small amount of freshly ground flaxseed stirred into porridge or sprinkled over food is very different from the whole seed left untouched. Buy them whole and grind small amounts as you need them. Ground flaxseed left sitting in a bag begins to deteriorate quite quickly. The freshly ground version has a slightly nutty flavor and a fine texture that blends easily into what you are already eating. Almonds appear in one of the most beautiful details in Scripture. Aaron's rod left overnight blossoms into an almond branch. The almond tree is one of the earliest to flower in the growing year, appearing before its leaves arrive in the cold of late winter. It was a symbol of watchfulness and readiness. Raw almonds, blanched briefly in hot water so the skins loosen and slip off, have a different flavor from roasted ones. Quieter, milkier, closer to what traditional preparations would have used. Roasting changes the oil inside, deepens the flavor, but also moves it away from the original. Keep a handful of raw almonds in a jar. They are the most uncomplicated thing on this list. Cumin was taken seriously enough in ancient Palestine that it was tithed. That means people counted their cumin seeds carefully and gave a portion as offering. Isaiah mentions threshing cumin specifically. The detail matters because cumin in its whole seed form and cumin that has been toasted and freshly ground are almost different things. The raw ground cumin from a supermarket jar smells dusty compared to what happens when you put the whole seeds into a dry pan over medium heat. They move, rattle slightly, and within a minute or two, the kitchen changes. A warm, slightly smoky, earthy fragrance opens up in the room. Toast first, grind after, use immediately. That is the method. Coriander carries one of the most vivid details in the book of Exodus. The manna, the food that appeared each morning for the Israelites in the desert, is described as looking like coriander seed, small, round, pale. Both the seed and the fresh leaf of this plant have their own character and their own place in traditional cooking. The seed is used dried and whole or ground for warmth. The fresh leaf, intensely aromatic, bright green, slightly citrusy, is used as it is picked. People often use only the dried powder and miss both the seed and the leaf entirely. Growing a pot of fresh coriander on a kitchen windowsill costs almost nothing and changes what is available in the kitchen entirely. The last three on this list are going to change how you think about what nourishment actually meant. But first, the bitter herbs, because this entry is different from every other one on the list. At Passover, bitter herbs are not just suggested, they are required. Eaten deliberately. Horseradish, chicory, endive, dandelion leaves depending on the region and the tradition. The bitterness was the point, not something to be softened or cooked away or hidden under sweetness. It was a texture and a flavor that carried meaning, and it was also simply part of how people ate. Fresh dandelion leaves pulled from an untreated garden are sharply bitter on the first bite. Chicory leaves have a similar quality. Older culinary traditions across the Mediterranean use bitterness as a regular part of a meal, not as a punishment, but as a counterpoint to richness. Modern cooking tends to remove it. The traditional version kept it. Hyssop appears in Psalm 51 and in the Passover preparations in Exodus. It was a plant with many uses in the ancient household, used for ritual cleansing in a way that tells you it was easily available, growing on the walls and in the hedgerows. The plant most likely referred to in the region is related to the oregano family. Its culinary and aromatic uses are often overlooked entirely because people associate it only with the ceremonial references. A handful of dried hyssop or za'atar steeped with the lid on the cup produces something quite different from an open steep. Keep the lid on. Let it work. Mint was tithed alongside cumin. Tiny, aromatic, growing in most gardens without much encouragement. The mistake with mint is using the extract or the flavoring instead of the real thing. Fresh mint or properly dried mint steeped in hot water with the lid on the cup is something else entirely. The menthol quality is present but softer. The flavor is bright and cooling. Dried extract carries a sharpness that has almost nothing to do with the original plant. One of these ingredients costs almost nothing and grows on a windowsill. The other gives very little of what the real thing provides. Now, the final third, and the last three entries are not what most people expect. Goat's milk. One of the most famous phrases in all of Scripture is, "a land flowing with milk and honey." When most people picture that milk, they picture what they take from the supermarket shelf. But the milk of that land, the milk of the ancient Middle East, was goat's milk. That is what people kept, what they carried, what they made into soft cheeses and cultured preparations. Goat's milk has a distinct flavor, slightly earthier, and often described as cleaner on the palate than cow's milk. It is still the primary dairy in many traditional Mediterranean and Middle Eastern households. It is used in slow-cooked dishes, in drinks, in soft white cheeses that are made in households across those regions to this day. If you have only ever tasted it in a flavored product, the plain version is worth trying. It carries a history that has nothing to do with the health food trend it has become. Fish appears as the simplest food on the entire list, and the simplest foods often carry the most overlooked lessons. After the resurrection, the disciples are at the shore. A fire is burning. Fish is cooking on the coals. Bread is there. Nothing else is described. No seasoning mentioned. No elaborate preparation. Just fish and fire and the smell of the water. The disciples were fishermen. Fish was daily food, prepared simply, eaten immediately. There was no sauce, no processing, no packaging. The modern version of fish has become something almost unrecognizable in comparison. Battered, processed, flavored, frozen, pressed into shapes, coated in things that have nothing to do with the original. A piece of fresh fish, simply cooked, served without ceremony, is the version this list points to. Simple preparation is not a limitation. It is the method. One of these is not even a food, and it is the most revealing entry on the list. Spikenard. In the Gospel of John, Mary anoints Jesus with spikenard, an expensive, fragrant ointment. The scent was described as filling the room. Spikenard is an aromatic plant from the Himalayas, used in ancient Mediterranean and Middle Eastern household and religious preparation for its deep, earthy, warm fragrance. It is not something you eat. It never was. It sits on this list because the biblical pantry was not only stocked with food. It included what people applied, what they used on their skin, what they prepared for the household. Nourishment, in the traditional sense, was broader than what went into the mouth. The household included aromatic preparations, oils applied to the body, things kept close, not because they were eaten, but because they were valued for their presence, their scent, their use in ritual and in care. They were not building a supplement stack. They were building a life, and these 20 things were part of it. That is what strikes me when I walk through my own kitchen now. The olive oil by the stove, the jar of raw honey with the crystallized edges, a pomegranate sitting on the counter, dense and heavy in my hand, dried figs in a glass jar on the shelf, lentils in another, garlic by the cutting board, waiting, none of it exotic, none of it expensive, none of it purchased because a wellness trend told me it was the next important thing. My grandmother did not read about any of this in a health article. She just cooked with it. She kept honey in the cupboard and garlic in the larder and dried things in jars. She did not call it ancient wisdom. She called it Tuesday. And somewhere between her kitchen and the supplement aisle, we forgot that what sustained people across thousands of years might still be worth keeping close. On the table in front of me right now, there is a small wooden bowl. A fig, dark and slightly wrinkled, 2 medjool dates, a handful of raw almonds, a small jar of raw honey with the lid resting beside it. Ordinary things, quiet things, things that have been here, in various forms, longer than almost any tradition we can trace. Tell me in the comments which of these you already keep in your kitchen, and if your family grew up cooking with any of them, I really want to hear how. That is the knowledge worth passing on. And if you want more forgotten food traditions like this one explained clearly, this is exactly the right place to be.